When basketball icon Michael Jordan makes an unforeseen stop at a KFC in his old neighborhood, he is stunned to find his long-lost childhood friend, Leroy Wilson, working the fryer. The stark contrast in their fortunes prompts Michael to make a pivotal decision, one that will profoundly alter both their destinies and uplift an entire community. What starts as a serendipitous encounter blossoms into an incredible act of camaraderie that no one saw coming, demonstrating that the most significant assists often happen far from the basketball court. Michael Jordan was weary, a deep-seated fatigue that stemmed from an endless series of board meetings and a deficit of sleep. His private aircraft had touched down in Wilmington, North Carolina, less than an hour before, and his only desire was to check into his hotel and collapse. But a growl from his stomach served as a reminder that he hadn't had a meal since a meager breakfast. Ahead, he saw the familiar red and white stripes of a Kentucky Fried Chicken and steered his polished black SUV into the lot. It wasn't his typical dining preference, but the nostalgia of being back in his hometown triggered a craving for the comforting fried chicken of his younger days. "A baseball cap is a must," he murmured, retrieving one from the glove compartment. Even at 61, Michael couldn't venture out without drawing attention. He pulled the cap down low, obscuring his famous features as he entered the establishment. The KFC was bustling but not overcrowded, a typical mix of high school students, exhausted parents with lively children, and employees on their late-night meal breaks. Michael joined the queue, head bowed, pretending to study the menu board, though his order was already decided. "Welcome to KFC. How can I help you?" the cashier asked, her gaze fixed on the register. "A two-piece combo, original recipe, with a large mashed potatoes and a Pepsi," Michael said, his voice hushed. The cashier nodded, still not looking up as she keyed in his order. While he waited, Michael's eyes wandered over to the kitchen staff. They moved with a synchronized rhythm born of routine, taking orders, breading chicken, managing the fryers. His gaze settled on an older man working the fryer station. There was something about his posture that pricked Michael's memory. The man was tall, with a lean frame and shoulders that retained a look of strength despite his age. His movements were efficient and sure as he lowered baskets of chicken into the hot oil, a cadence to his work that suggested years of experience. Michael tilted his head, trying to place the familiar form. The man turned slightly to call out an order, and Michael saw his profile in the harsh kitchen light. His heart seemed to stop for a beat. "No, it can't be," he whispered to himself. Those distinct cheekbones, the set of his jaw, the way his brow creased with focus even with graying hair, and the lines of age etched around his eyes. Michael would know Leroy Wilson anywhere. "Order number 73, another worker called out. Michael collected his meal in a daze, his appetite vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. He found a small table in a quiet corner that offered a clear line of sight to the kitchen and sat down. Leroy Wilson, his very first true friend, the boy who had shown him how to execute a perfect finger roll when his hands were still too small to palm the ball. The friend who had vanished from his life just before they were supposed to start high school together, and now, here he was, working the fryers at a KFC. Michael opened his box of chicken automatically, his eyes fixed on Leroy. He watched his old friend wipe a sheen of sweat from his forehead with the back of his arm, check the timer on the fryer, and offer a word of encouragement to a younger coworker. There was a quiet dignity in his actions, a pride in his labor. A torrent of questions flooded Michael's mind. What had happened to Leroy after he moved away? Why was he working this job at his age? Did he ever pursue basketball? Did he have a family? Did he ever think of Michael? Michael took a bite of chicken, the familiar taste barely registering. He remembered Leroy's incredible agility on the court. "Smooth as silk," he used to say. He had been the undisputed star of their local court, the one everyone predicted would go pro. Now, Michael Jordan was a billionaire, one of the most recognizable athletes in history, while Leroy Wilson was earning a modest wage at a fast food restaurant. The strange, unpredictable turns of life weighed heavily on Michael as he watched his friend. He contemplated his own string of fortunate breaks, the doors that had opened for him. Had Leroy been denied those same opportunities? Or had something else intervened? A young employee nearby dropped a tray of drink lids, the plastic clatter echoing in the restaurant and pulling Michael from his reverie. He watched as Leroy quickly went to help, patting the flustered teenager on the back with a reassuring smile. "It's all right, son. Happens to the best of us," Leroy said, his voice audible across the dining area. That voice deeper now, yet possessing the same gentle authority Michael recalled. Leroy had always been the kind one, the protector. Michael's grip on his Pepsi cup tightened. He should go over, say hello, just walk up to the counter and call his name. But what would he say after so many years? "Hey, remember me? The kid you used to school on the court, who got famous while you ended up here?" No, he couldn't do that. Not in front of Leroy's colleagues and the remaining customers. His friend deserved more respect than that. Michael noticed a slight stiffness in Leroy's gait as he returned to his station. A small, almost imperceptible hitch in his step. An old injury? Arthritis from years of standing? The fluorescent lights glinted off Leroy's name tag. A wave of emotion washed over Michael. This was the man who had seen his potential before anyone else, who had recognized the fire in the skinny kid who couldn't even make the varsity team on his first try. "You've got the heart, Mike," Leroy used to say. "That's the part they can't coach. All the talent in the world means nothing if you don't have the heart." Michael finished his meal in slow motion, memories flooding his mind. The endless hours on the sun-baked court behind Leroy's house. The way Leroy had shared his prized possession, a genuine leather basketball his father had worked overtime to afford. The secret, intricate handshake they had perfected the summer Michael turned 11. Customers trickled in and out as the evening progressed. Michael bought another drink, an excuse to linger. He watched Leroy glance at the clock, exchange a few words with a coworker, and then head to the back. A few minutes later, he reappeared without his KFC visor and apron, clocking out. Michael slid lower in his seat as Leroy walked toward the exit, not wanting to be seen just yet. Through the large window, he saw his childhood friend make his way to an old, faded green pickup truck parked in the far corner of the lot. Leroy paused before getting in, stretching his back with a soft groan. Long after the green truck had disappeared into the night, Michael remained at his table, his food long gone. Sleep would be impossible tonight, not after seeing Leroy. Not with all the resurrected memories and unanswered questions swirling in his head. Michael Jordan, six-time NBA champion, billionaire and global icon, sat alone in a KFC booth in his hometown, feeling like that insecure 13-year-old boy all over again. The boy who had lost his best friend without a single word of goodbye. The boy who had funneled all that pain and confusion into becoming the greatest basketball player the world had ever known. "Tomorrow," Michael resolved. "Tomorrow, I'll come back. Tomorrow, I will talk to Leroy Wilson." Sleep was a fleeting visitor for Michael that night. He tossed and turned in the king-size bed of his hotel suite, his mind a cinema of memories. Michael at 10, a lanky collection of knees and elbows, the basketball feeling foreign in his hands. It was the summer of 1973 when he first crossed paths with Leroy Wilson. Michael's family had just moved to a new part of Wilmington, and he was the lonely new kid. His older brothers, Larry and James, were more interested in their own friends than in their little brother. On his third day in the new house, Michael found his way to the local park's basketball court. A group of older boys was in the middle of a heated game, their shouts and laughter echoing in the humid summer air. Michael stayed on the periphery, too timid to ask to play. One boy was a clear standout. He was tall for his age, with an effortless grace and hands that seemed to have a magnetic connection to the ball. He weaved through the other players as if they were stationary cones. When the game concluded, this boy noticed Michael watching from the sidelines. Instead of dismissing him like the others, he ambled over, the basketball resting comfortably on his hip. "You play?" he asked, his smile genuine and welcoming. Michael shrugged, mumbling, "A little. I'm Leroy Wilson," the boy said, offering his hand. "Michael Jordan," he replied, shaking it. "Want me to show you a thing or two?" Leroy asked. That was the start of it all. Every day that summer, Michael would race through his chores to meet Leroy at the court. Leroy was 12, 2 years Michael's senior, and a fount of basketball wisdom. "You gotta be smooth as silk, Mike," Leroy would say, demonstrating a flawless finger roll. "Let it glide off your fingertips, just like this." Michael would try to emulate Leroy's fluid motions, but his coordination was still developing. He'd stumble over his own feet, or the ball would bounce erratically off the rim. But Leroy never mocked him. "You'll get it," he'd say with unwavering patience. "You've got the feel for it. Just needs practice." The memory shifted to a sweltering afternoon when they sought refuge from the heat at Leroy's house. It was a modest home, smaller than Michael's, with well-loved furniture, but it was immaculate and filled with warmth. Mrs. Wilson served them tall glasses of sweet tea. They sat on the worn rug of Leroy's bedroom, a basketball magazine spread between them. "That's the Iceman, George Gervin," Leroy said, pointing to a photo of the San Antonio Spurs star. "Look at that finger roll. Pure art. I want to do that someday," Michael had said, his voice full of awe. Leroy had looked at him with a serious expression. "You will, I can tell." Michael smiled at the recollection. Leroy had been his first believer, even before Michael truly believed in himself. Another memory surfaced. The day Leroy got his new basketball. The Wilsons didn't have much, but Leroy's father, a mechanic, had worked extra shifts for a month to buy him a real leather ball for his 13th birthday. "Just feel it, Mike," Leroy had said, holding it out reverently. "It's the real deal, like the pros use." Michael remembered the pebbled texture, the perfect weight, the intoxicating scent of new leather. "We'll share it," Leroy declared. "It's our ball now." Michael had been floored. It was the kindest gesture anyone outside his immediate family had ever made. They had made a pact that day, sitting under the shade of a large magnolia tree by the court. Leroy had taken out a piece of notebook paper and a pencil. "We, Leroy Wilson and Michael Jordan, promise to practice every day and make it to the NBA someday." They both signed their names. Leroy folded the paper neatly and handed it to Michael. "You hold on to it," he'd said, "so you don't forget." Michael never did. That creased, yellowed piece of paper was now framed and held a place of honor in his home office. The memories kept coming. The time a group of bigger kids from another neighborhood tried to take over their court. "Look at this skinny kid," one of them had sneered at Michael. "Bet he cries if you take his ball." Before Michael could react, Leroy had stepped in front of him. "You're not playing here today," he said, his voice calm but unyielding. The older boy shoved Leroy. Leroy stood his ground. It escalated into a brief scuffle, and Leroy ended up with a split lip, but the bullies retreated. "Why'd you do that?" Michael asked later, as Leroy dabbed his lip with a handkerchief. "Nobody messes with my little brother," Leroy had said, even though they were only friends. He remembered countless evenings practicing until the streetlights flickered on, Leroy patiently demonstrating the proper form for a jump shot, the importance of footwork on defense. "It's all about the work, Mike," Leroy would preach. "Talent will only take you so far. It's the hours you put in when no one is watching that makes you great." Michael had absorbed those words, made them his mantra. Even after Leroy was gone, he kept practicing. Early mornings, late nights, rain or shine. Sometimes, when he was alone on the court, he'd imagine Leroy was still there, offering critiques. "Get your elbow in, Mike. You're flying open. Defense is played with your feet, not your hands. You gotta want it more than the other guy." Another memory, sharp and painful, surfaced. The summer before Michael was to enter high school. He and Leroy were playing a game of HORSE as the sun bled across the horizon. "You're getting too good, Mike," Leroy said, a note of pride in his voice. "You're gonna be better than me soon." "No way," Michael had protested. "You're still the king of this court." "Not for much longer," Leroy had predicted with a knowing smile. "You've got that something special. I can see it." "We'll both make it to the NBA," Michael had insisted, full of youthful optimism. "Just like we promised." Leroy had grown quiet then, just bouncing the ball slowly. "Yeah," he'd said, his voice distant. "Just like we promised." 2 weeks later, Leroy was gone. Michael remembered knocking on the Wilsons' front door, the shared basketball tucked under his arm, only to be met by a stranger. "They moved out last week," the woman had said. "Up to Virginia, I think. Something about a job for his dad." Michael had been stunned into silence. No goodbye, no forwarding address. His best friend had simply vanished. That night, Michael took their basketball, deflated it, and hid it in the back of his closet. He cried himself to sleep, a rare occurrence, feeling a profound sense of betrayal and loss. But the next morning, he rose before dawn and went to the court alone. "I'll keep our promise, Leroy," he had whispered to the empty air, launching a jump shot. "For both of us." And he had. He made the high school team, earned a scholarship to the University of North Carolina, and was drafted by the Chicago Bulls. Championships, fame, fortune, it all followed. And through it all, he kept the pact, a tangible link to where he had started, and to the first person who had truly believed in him. The ringing of his hotel room phone jolted him back to the present. It was his assistant, reminding him of his morning appointments. "I need to reschedule," Michael said, his voice firm. "Something's come up. Something important." Tomorrow, he would see Leroy again, and this time, he wouldn't be watching from a distance.